Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 9 true macabre horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Now, let's begin. I won't name the funeral home. I'll say we're a big place by small town standards, an hour outside a city with river fog that hangs so low at night it presses against the windows. The prep room is all bleached tile and hard shine. Chrome tables, drain catch, embalming machine with a hum you feel more than you hear. It's clean and warmed. The headlamp burned a white tunnel into the room. The light caught on the crucifix we kept over the doorway. It tilted on its nail, silly detail to remember, and the shadow of it stretched along the ceiling like a hand. Every hair on my arm stood up under the Tyvek. People do this, I said aloud to the room. They do this sometimes. I was saying it to the apprentice who wasn't there, to myself, to the weirdness. It's gas. It's normal. The intercom crackled, and very slowly, in that sludge of static, a voice that was not mine and wasn't the building's said through the speaker, "Don't put me back in the dark." I didn't move. I couldn't. I could feel the blood in my wrists counting my seconds. I could smell the citrus of the prep room cleaner, and underneath it, rain, and underneath that, something like an old wool coat warmed by a radiator. I did what my hands know to do. I put one hand on the edge of the table in case the body shifted again. I put the other on the intercom to see if I could feel the vibration of the speaker under my gloved palm when it spoke. It was solid and dead and a little sticky with the residue of years of disinfectant. I pressed the call button in case someone else somehow was there. It returned a gentle tone and nothing else. I leaned down. I should not have, but I did. The beam of my headlamp made a circle of light at Mr. L's mouth. There is a way the lips part when relaxation takes everything. It's a fact, not a fear. They were parted. Inside that small dark was the sound of my own breathing bouncing back at me. And then, very clearly, as if spoken 2 inches from my ear, "Not again." The crucifix fell. There's no other way to put it. It looked like it was pushed. The nail that had been working loose for months gave up, and wood met tile with a dry smack. I flinched so hard I knocked my headlamp sideways and shot the room with wild lig. The intercom squealed. The aspirator, off, coughed once like a person choking awake. I grabbed the length of cotton from the tray and did what I'd planned to do before the power died. I spoke because not speaking would have been wrong. "I won't put you in the dark," I said. "You're staying with me. We're going to keep it bright." I pulled the prep table closer to the emergency battery lamp we keep by the doorway. It's a boxy thing with a handle. I put it on the counter and pointed it square at Mr. L like a stage light. That room looked like a set from some fevered play, chrome and tile and a single circle of white cutting the night into clean and unclean halves. The intercom went quiet. 15 minutes later, the generator finally caught like a stubborn chest that suddenly remembers how to breathe. Lights came back with a flicker. The aspirator hummed its boring hum. The room became the room again. I finished my work. I did it slow, and I did it with the bright lamp staying lit the entire time, even when the overheads returned, because I said I would, and because I meant it. In the morning, I called the security company to pull the overnight audio from the intercom recording system. We keep it for liability. I told the manager there had been a malfunction that spooked me. He laughed and said the system was old. He sent the file anyway. I brought it home on a thumb drive. I sat at my kitchen table with the blinds open and the noon sun landing wide on the wood because daylight felt necessary. I played the timestamp for 12:04 a.m. The intercom clicked once. I could hear rain like rice on tin. And then, muddy, low, unmistakable, I heard it. "Don't put me back in the dark." People hear what they want to hear. That has been my mantra in the room and out of it. You hear the radiator and call it a word. You hear pipes and call them what you're afraid of. I have trained myself out of that. I have untrained myself out of it too, on nights I can't explain. The footage doesn't show anything. The audio does. I saved it. I don't play it much. It's not terrifying like a scream. It's worse for being reasonable. You could play it to someone and they would say, "Yeah, that could be anything," and you would nod and then go home and never sleep in a room without a nightlight again. I don't work alone overnight anymore. It's policy now, officially because of safety, unofficially because I asked. When I do work, I do what my grandmother did with her dead. I talk, I narrate every step. I keep a lamp on even when I don't need one. When the family asks if I can leave a light near the casket during visitation, I tell them we already do. It's true. It feels right. I don't pretend I know what I heard. I know what I won't do. I won't say the dead don't talk. I won't say the room is empty just because it looks like it. And I won't put anyone back in the dark without warning them first. I run a 3-person crew, certified, insured, licensed with the state. We don't do crime scenes much. Police handle those in our county until they don't. What we see more often are unattended deaths, apartments where a person went quiet without anyone to tell them it was okay. This was one of those. I'll spare the address. The building was a 4-story walk-up built when people thought plaster was going to outlast them all. It had a narrow lobby with marble wainscot and a chandelier that had never once been cleaned. We were called for Unit 412. Management met me in the vestibule with a metal ring of keys large enough to anchor a small boat. He looked sick in that way you get when your job collides with the fact that people are people. He told me the tenant, Mrs. M, had lived there 42 years. He told me the tenant had no family. He told me he hadn't gone inside. We ascended on a stair that moaned under cleaning carts. At the 4th floor, the hallway turned colder. Doors flanked us like closed eyes. I smelled lemon cleaner where someone had tried to make the place hospitable and failed. 412's door was the one with 3 newspaper rubber bands abandoned on the knob. Our job starts after the medical examiner clears the scene. That part had been done. The tape was gone. The seal broken. We stepped into a room that had been paused. Rising action. Some details hit all at once. A line of dusty light laid across the floor from a blind that had stuck halfway down, sometime during an entirely different year. 2 chairs facing each other with a chessboard between them. Mid-game, one white piece knocked to the carpet and sunk deep into it. A radio on the counter that wasn't plugged in, and still I'd have sworn it was on because I could hear a song just under everything, like a neighbor had been playing it yesterday and the air kept the shape of the sound. The smell, a sweetness, has gone wrong, and underneath it a clean chemical bite from the bag of enzyme powder I carried like a talisman. We do our work. It's practical, methodical. You strip soft goods, you bag, you remove, you neutralize, you clean from the outside in so you don't track yourself into yesterday. You always keep the windows open if you can, not just because of the air, but because the outside sound reminds you how to hear. The closet by the entry was screwed shut. Screws on the exterior of a closet door are wrong for a lot of reasons. I stood there with my driver in my hand and my crew leader at my shoulder and chewed the inside of my cheek. The ME had cleared the unit, but I had not cleared the closet. We open it, my crew leader said. We log it. Practical. Sensible. I told him to strip the bedroom and stay on comms with me. I unscrewed the first screw. It came out grudgingly, like it knew something I didn't. Some buildings talk. You think it's the pipes until it isn't. As I backed the last screw out with a steady whine, a knock answered from the other side of the door. Low, solid, not loud, once. I froze. My driver spun another half-second in air before my finger got the message and let go of the trigger. I waited. Nothing. My crew leader called my name from the hallway. I didn't answer because my voice was missing. I put my palm flat against the wood. It was cold the way a church pew is cold. I pushed. The door sighed out. Darkness like cloth above a mirror fell. There are 2 kinds of darkness. The kind you can fill with your flashlight and the kind that swallows light and asks for more. The closet had been turned into a darkroom. Heavy black plastic lined the interior like a second skin, taped and stapled with stubborn care. A single bare bulb hung in the center, string-wrapped. Trays, clothesline, clips, a camera on a tripod. The red bulb over the switch had been painted rather than fitted. The paint flaked like old nail polish. Photos were everywhere, not hung, stacked, tucked, layered between books in the wire shelving and between coats on hangers like someone had dressed the idea of a person. I pulled one from the stack nearest my gloved hand. In it, the hallway of this building, same scratch in the baseboard, same plaster wrinkle near the ceiling. The light was different, a warmer bulb maybe, but the angle was precise, across from 412, as if 412 had been watching 411's door for a long time. I kept pulling. The photos graduated from hallway to windows, fire escapes, faces behind glass, people sleeping, lit by a TV you could tell had been playing a game show by the haloed points along the bottom edge. No faces that felt like now. All of them felt like then. And then I saw one that cleaved me along my middle, my truck, nose in at the curb, company magnet on the door, me in the driver's seat, my head tilted toward the glove box because that's where I keep my hand sanitizer. From the angle, the camera had been higher than me. From the angle, it had been taken from the closet window. The hum in the room found a pitch I could not place. It braided with the sound of the street, the whir of my driver cooling, the whisper of my crew leader bagging bedding. Something moved above me, the timbers in the ceiling, or a person, or a memory, I couldn't tell. I pulled the black plastic aside at the back of the closet and found a vent panel with that screws removed and set carefully in a line on the shelf like a tiny parade. The panel opened into the maintenance chase, an old path for old pipes. It was big enough for a person to make a decision about. "Hey," I said softly to a darkness that didn't answer. "Hello?" The whisper that came back sounded like someone speaking into their own hands. "Don't close me in again." I set the photo down in the tray without meaning to. My driver fell to the carpet and I did not hear it. My heartbeat became the only sound in my ears. I stuck my head into the duct to prove I was braver than I am. The beam of my flashlight swung down a tight corridor of dust and lathe shaved thin by time. The light landed on an aluminum ladder, a child's step stool welded into the bones of the building, and on the next panel, also unscrewed, also waiting. I backed out and called it in. There's a number we call when the job shifts from cleaning to something else. We're not cops. We don't want to be. Building management said no one had a key to those chases anymore, that the last person who had known their switchbacks died in '98. My crew leader stood at my shoulder and whispered, "Do you hear that?" And I realized the song I'd been hearing since we came in was humming. Someone was humming. It didn't have words. It had a tune like the waiting room of a doctor's office 5 towns over. The police came. They are bigger than me by numbers and by certainty. They went into the chase with their hands out. They came out without anyone and with a handful of photographs I wish I could forget. One of them was taken from directly behind the chair where I was standing in 412. In it, the back of my head looked like a stranger's. They did not find a person. They found places where a person could have lived and did. Food wrappers, water bottles, a makeshift bed in the warm place above the boiler, a coffee case, and full of screws arranged by length and type and age. They found a word scrawled inside the chase in marker, darkened by dust over and over like someone wrote it until they got the shape right. Again. We finished our job. I documented the closet as more than I needed to for my file. We put a new panel on the vent and left 2 screws untouched on purpose because I could not bring myself to lock anything that had asked to stay open. The building hired a company to seal the chases with foam you could drive a nail into and not get a nail back, but foam is nothing to people who have been carried by buildings for years. A week later, management called to say the closet door had been screwed shut from the inside. They wanted to know if I still had a key. I said no. I told them to call the police. I do not know what came of it. Sometimes at jobs I hear a tune under the compressor sound and I realize I've been humming it. When that happens, I go to a window. I open it, even if I have to fight a screw someone put there a long time ago. I let the hallway air in. I let the building breathe. I photograph the space when we're done, and then I scroll very quickly through the pictures until I am sure I am the one who took them. Then I go home and put my truck into the garage and close the door and stand there for a minute in the bright dark and listen for a song that doesn't belong to me. My job is simple and complicated. I dust, I replace, I correct what gravity has rearranged, I keep the ledger. The ledger is older than my great-grandmother's bones. It's a book with pages the color of tea left too long without milk, ink brown to the exact shade of chestnuts. When a skull comes loose, I look for its number and its name. Not all have both. The older they are, the less likely. But I try. It matters to me that the dead aren't just pattern. It was a weekday in late winter when the chapel's stone stays cold into noon and the breath of visitors hangs like white scarves. A boy, 6 maybe, broke from his parents and leaped like a small fish in air. In the way of boys, he launched himself into the place you never think a child will aim, the rope line that says don't cross the threshold into the musk of centuries. He hit it, and the brace shifted, and the lower skirt of a column of femurs trembled, and then, only one bone, slipped and clattered to the stone. A single bone falling in a room of bones sounds louder than you'd imagine. Every head turned. The boy's father apologized in 3 languages at once. I had my gloves on before his last syllable left his mouth. I said it was not the end of the world. It was not. But no one likes to hear that a world can have more ends than one. I picked up the femur and saw, on the end that had been hidden, a mark in old ink that made my mouth go dry. A small letter and 3 numbers, the code we use for bones that have been matched to names, the code of bones that do not drift. I brought the bone to the back room, the one where we keep the ledger under glass, because the book itself has become a body we must preserve. The room smells like beeswax and winters piled atop one another. The window looks into a stone courtyard where nothing grows because it's all limestone down there, and behind it, older stone, and behind that, a void that no one wants to map. The mark on the bone was B124. The B makes no sense to anyone who doesn't know how we compiled our dead 200 years ago. To me, it was a village and a parish and a drawer in a cabinet that had been burned during an occupation that I am, by law and habit, not going to describe here. The number meant someone had once cared enough to match bone to a name, and then the name had been lost when the ledger had been moved during a flood. I felt the kind of focus I get when a thing might be fixed. The ledger does not open fast. You use two hands, slow, and you ease its weight onto the velvet cradle like you mean it. I turned pages, licking a finger under my glove like a monk would slap me for. B. Village. Alphabetical within that. B124. There it was. And then, in the neat hand of a man dead 2 centuries. Anna V. Nake. A date. A note. Returned too soon. Returned to what? No one uses that phrase. I've never seen it before or since. The chapel emptied with the last tour. The stone sighed back to its usual volume, a quiet you can hear. I replaced the femur in my cart and wheeled it toward the column, whose belly had loosened. I worked my gloved fingers into the pattern and felt the cadence of it line up with the muscle memory I've built over a decade. Bones want to fit. They want to be the way they remember. The light through the window thinned to the color of skin under a winter lake. I worked. The altar cloth moved as if someone brushed by. No one did. The air dipped colder. I put the bone in and stepped back to see if the pattern looked right. It didn't. Nothing looked wrong. That's worse. The door from the sacristy clicked at my back. It clicks when the latch drops. It does not click when no one touches it. I turned, ready to call my colleague a name in a friendly voice. The sacristy was empty. The ledger room was empty. The courtyard's frozen air pressed itself against the glass like a ghost with patience. I said aloud, "Not funny," because I grew up in a family where saying the obvious aloud keeps your grandmother from climbing out of her portrait. I felt watched. You know the dressed feeling? Like you put on a coat and only later realized someone had tailored it while you slept? I felt arranged. The hair on my neck lifted one hair at a time. I put my palm against the bone column the way you put your hand on a friend's arm to get their attention. It was cold all the way into me. The ledger's room light went out. Simple timer, cheap bulb, I told myself, throwing a long shadow from the chandelier of skulls and crossbones onto the floor. It wasn't the shadow that took my breath. It was the skull tilted just so in that chandelier, enough that the thin iron wire gave, and a jawbone, delicately hung, fell and landed in the dust at my feet so softly it might have been a moth. In the hinge of that jaw, in a place no one who hadn't handled bones would think to look, was a slip of paper rolled thin as a communion wafer. I do not stage things in sacred spaces. No one on my staff would either. We have too much to lose and more to respect. I slid the paper free and unrolled it under my glove. On it, in that same neat 2 centuries dead hand, was the name again, Anna V. Nake. A. And beneath it, a line I could feel more than read. Put me back. The floor under my feet felt not right. There's a trick old sellers do when the freeze pushes and the thaw yields. The stones shift and sigh. They sometimes move like breath, slow enough you can see a candle widen and thin as if it were on a throat. The floor in that moment wasn't moving, not like that. It was a feeling like the building remembered being a hill, and the hill remembered being a burial, and the burial remembered a name no one was saying. I put the jaw back the way it had hung, and I did it with the kind of care that would make my grandmother nod. I took the femur, B124, and slid it into its place in the column with both palms and a wordless apology. I went back to the ledger room and opened the book again and wrote in the margin by the brown old ink in my own small neat hand, the date and a note. Recovered from chandelier. Returned. The chapel stilled. There's a difference between quiet and still. Quiet is what a room is when the people leave. Still is what it is when it accomplishes the thing it woke to do. The sacristy door did not click again, but I knew, the way you know rain will find you even if you're already under an umbrella, that I had bothered something that prefers not to be noticed. We have cameras in the chapel, not because we think the dead will walk, but because tourists sometimes like to take pieces of centuries home in their pockets. The morning after, I pulled the footage to see if anyone had been where they shouldn't. At 1631, a shadow in the far corner, the kind that belongs to a person, appeared where no person was. It was the outline of a woman's head and shoulders. The head turned, the shadow thinned. At 1632, the jawbone fell into the frame. The shadow wasn't cast by light, it moved counter to the window. I watched it 3 times and then stopped. The file lives on a drive labeled Archive. I do not open it unless a curious donor asks for proof that we have a ghost. I tell them we have names. That's worse. A month later, a man came in with a bag I recognized because we've taken that bag from people before. He had the look of someone who's convinced themselves that stealing from the dead is different when you call it collecting. He said a friend of his grandfather's had a skull from our chapel and had asked him to bring it home. He used the word home a lot. He set the bag down and took out a skull. The maxilla was cracked. In the bone above the eye was an old ink mark, B124. She didn't like the dark, he said. I asked him how he knew that. He said, she told me. We made our records. We did not call the police. You learn to choose your battles and your indulgences in a place made of the bones of people who fought over every inch of ground. We put the skull where it should have been, and the pattern of that column looked right in a way my shoulders knew before my eyes did. The ledger got another line. Returned, I wrote, and then, because it felt truer than anything else, at last. I don't tell tourists the story. I tell them how to move through the chapel with their hands at their sides and their voices low. I tell them to look for the crowns carved in tibia along the arch and the small flower someone had pressed into an eye socket so long ago it turned the exact brown of the dust that holds up the world. I tell them the names matter. When I dust, I say them, even the ones that are only letters and numbers. I say them like a map back through the dark. The dead here are not restless. They are not angry. They are arranged. But arrangement is a promise. If you break it, the room remembers. If you remember with it, the room breathes easier. I don't need more than that. I don't want more than that. The ledger adds lines with my hand and will do so with someone else's when my bones find their way into someone's pattern. When I pass the chandelier, I look up and make sure the wire is holding. I do not think about the paper in the jaw. I do not say her name aloud unless I am alone. When the day's last tour leaves and the caretaker's keys sound like a small wind chime in a place that knows winter, I say goodnight to the dead. I turn off the lights in a sequence I learned in my second week and never forgot. I leave one lamp burning next to the ledger because it makes me feel less like I'm abandoning an old friend in a room we both know breathes. I lock the door. I go home. I sleep with my window cracked even when it's cold because some names prefer a little air. People think the worst part is the heat. It isn't. It's the sound of the blowers thrumming in your bones and the way time changes in there. 2 hours passes in a rhythm of checks and notes and heat checks and the small rituals of care you perform for someone who can't ask you to. We're regulated like you wouldn't believe, and that's good. There's a chain of custody from paperwork to stainless steel ID disc to processed cremains. There are 2 burners, the primary in the main chamber and the afterburner in the secondary chamber that eats smoke before it ever thinks about a chimney. There's a pacemaker check because those things can explode, and I mean explode if you miss one. You get in the habit of talking to the dead because you say out loud what you're doing, not for ghosts, but for dignity. I had a case last winter that I thought about keeping to myself, not because it makes me look bad, but because it sits under my tongue like a coin. The family will never hear this. I won't give names or dates. I'll tell you only that the woman's first name was Iris, and that her daughter wanted a witness cremation. Witness cremations are exactly what they sound like. The family gathers behind a pane of tempered glass in a small viewing room, and I perform the transfer and the start of the process with them watching. There are forms for it. There's a talk I give where I say, some families find this comforting, some do not. You can leave at any point. We'll pause if you need. I tell them the truth, that the retort will be preheated, that there will be flame, that the process takes 90 minutes to 2.5 hours depending on body mass and casket material. I ask them to remove any keepsakes they want because the furnace is no place for gold to stay gold. The daughter insisted that the wedding ring go with her mother. We have a standard disclaimer for jewelry. We cannot guarantee recovery, I said. We cannot guarantee it won't be damaged, I said. She looked at me like I knew the difference between forever and not forever and was choosing the latter. It stays, she said. She wore it 58 years. It stays. The son nodded. He had the look of a man who'd argue if he had the energy. We checked the body. There was no pacemaker. Intake had flagged an old one and a removal scar. The stainless ID disc was in my hand, stamped with the case number. I placed it on the sheet at the foot end. I told Iris what I tell everyone. I'm going to take good care of you, I said, and I meant it. The retort was a Matthews unit, primary chamber set to 1,600 degrees F for the start. Hot enough that when the door slides open you feel the heat on your teeth. The witness room has its own vent and its own thermostat. The family stood in the soft yellow of it, close as they could be to the glass without putting their hands on it. I transferred Iris from the cardboard alternative container, no metal screws, no lacquer, to the roller rack and then into the chamber, feet first, the way we do. The ring flashed once in the light and then settled back under the sheet. I slid the charge door down. The second the seals kissed, the blowers spun up. The primary came alive with a low thunder and then a white roar you don't hear so much as feel. Sometimes the afterburner hums at a pitch the room answers. It's a weird sound, thin and attentive, like the room is listening back. As the primary took, I saw the daughter lean toward the glass and say something I couldn't hear, and then put her palm up against it. I could see the mark of her hand like a ghost on a pond. There are 100 tiny things you watch. Flue temperature, chamber temperature, oxygen trim, opacity. kept near zero because the secondary does its job. I worked my routine. Through the peephole I could see what I always see, an interior that looks like a sunrise on repeat. The refractory tiles shift as they heat. You learn which ticks are old tile and which are trouble. The room smelled faintly of hot dust, and under it eucalyptus from the disinfectant wipes we use on the roller rails. The heads-up display reflected on the glass and made it look like numbers floated in the flames. The double-paned window between the kiln and the witness room gathered a faint moisture, not from heat but from breathing. At 20 minutes, the afterburner tripped out. It happens. Sensor jitter. I reset it. A minute later, it tripped again. The alarm is discreet. You could be eating a sandwich and not feel hurried by it. The third time, the daughter jumped. The son put a hand on her elbow. I got on the intercom. All normal, I said. Just a sensor being sensitive. I smiled like I meant it. I did, mostly. 10 minutes later, as the primary did its loudest work, something tapped inside the chamber. Not spalling. Refractory spalls sound like glass cracking in a silent church. This was a knock. Soft. Single. The daughter flinched and turned her head like a bird. I leaned to the peephole and saw only white. The decedent shifts as what's left of tendons and skin give. Things make noises. That's the speech I give myself when my back goes tight. Half an hour in, the room took on a thin, impossible smell that I couldn't place until I could. Roses. The daughter was wearing no perfume. We don't let visitors bring florals into the kiln room proper. The scent came like it does when you open an old hat box, and the memory of scent is louder than the scent. I checked the console. All numbers were in range. I looked through the peephole and saw the retort's interior swim with heat like water, and then in that shimmering, a shadow moved. Not a shape that makes sense. More like the heat ate a darker part of the heat and carried it upward in a column like a hand might carry a candle. "Do you hear that?" the daughter asked through the intercom I had not pressed. "The audio is one way except when I hold the button." I looked at the intercom. My hand was at my side. The speaker carried her voice anyway. "She's humming," she said. "She used to hum when she baked." At 92 minutes, the cycle ended like it does. The primary eased, the secondary stayed hot, the chamber bled color back into white. I waited for the temp to drop to the safe range, then cracked the charge door and brought the rake and the titanium pan forward onto the rolling table. The ID disc pinged against the lip of the pan, bright and ordinary. The bones were calcine white, except where they always aren't, little islands of cream. The ring sat in a scuttle of ash near where the left hand would have been. Gold does funny things at our temperatures. Sometimes it sags like butter that's decided to be water without committing. This ring had held its circle. I turned to the witness room. The daughter had tears on her face. The son had the look of someone who's trying to find the shape of a day. I nodded to them. We'd agreed they'd step out after the start. They stayed. People do. I moved the pan to the cooling station. You don't process hot. You wait. There's a scale. I logged the weight. It wasn't a number I expected. At Iris's body mass, bone density aging, we see a certain range. The readout showed a number too high by a margin that mattered. Not impossible. Uncomfortable. I pulled the magnet through the pan. It collected the usual screws from a hip plate, a stray staple, something that looked like the core of a dental implant. I set the ring aside to go back in the pan before processing, because pulverizing with the ring inside was a good way to ruin a very expensive machine. I lifted the pan and felt the wrongness again. Not wrong, but like picking up a box of books you think is all paper and finding one iron tool under everything. In the ash, in the irregular shorelines of bone fragment, was a tiny, perfect, curved piece of bone. I knew what it was because I've seen skeletons at every stage. It was the outline of a neonatal iliac crest. The spine of a child is mostly cartilage, the bone like punctuation marks inside. But the iliac wing, the flare of the hip, sometimes preserves this little shape. It was small enough to sit on the tip of my glove. I stood there with the blower humming in my ears and a very boring clock tick in my chest. I looked at the pan, I looked at the witness window, and found the daughter looking not at me but at the pan as if she could see right through the metal. She had the look of recognition. She put her hand on the glass again and said, without the intercom, without any button making that possible, "Don't separate them." I put the magnet down. I did not touch the small bone again. It could have been anything, I told myself. Fragments take on deceitful shapes. You can see what you're afraid of to see. You can't cremate two people together, the law says, and the console and the tag and the labels all say the same. You can't. After cooling, I moved the pan to the processor. It's called a cremulator, a machine with a drum and blades that reduce the bone fragments to a uniform consistency. This one is loud in the way a dryer full of stones is loud, except with control. You load the pan, you close the lid, you press the start. It rumbles, it vibrates the bench in a way you feel through your hip. The duration depends on the coarseness you want. Ours is standard. Halfway through, the processor shuddered and stopped. Overload. It happens when a large piece jams the drum. I powered down. I opened the lid. The smell of warm minerals and heat met my face like a cave. I reached in with the scoop and found the obstruction. It wasn't a large chunk of femur. It was a locket. Oval. B. Lackened on its edges. The hinge had fused, but not forever. The back was engraved badly, as if by a hand that hadn't done lettering in decades. Sleep, my sparrow. I sat down on the steel step stool in a way my back will reprimand me for in 10 years and put my head in my hands because there are choices and there are instructions and sometimes they come up against each other with an edge. I tapped the hinge with the plastic handle of the magnet stick until it gave. Inside, under ash and a film of fixatives gone to resin a long time ago, was a coil of hair, the exact thin blonde of wheat at noon. Hair and metal can survive when hair and air would not. I have never, in 11 years, banged on a witness room window. I did then, softly, like you would to get a friend's attention. The daughter looked up. I held the locket up where she could see it. I did not open it to the glass. I didn't need to. She nodded. Her mouth formed the word yes, like a breath. I finished the process. I put the ring back in the urn with the processed remains, because that was the plan, and because plans matter. I put the locket in the urn too. When I brought the urn into the arrangement room, the daughter asked without preamble, when my mother was 19, she lost a baby at home. It was 1964. Her own mother cut a lock of its hair and told her she could keep it as long as no one else knew. She wore it once around her neck until my father saw it and asked what she was mourning. She put it in a locket. She kept it. We found it when we packed the house. I put it in the casket without telling you. I thought... She stopped. She looked at the urn like it might bruise. I thought she wouldn't want to be without her again. We have rules, and they are good rules. We ask families not to place lithium batteries, aerosol cans, certain plastics. We do not anticipate locketed hair from a child dead more than half a century. I said, I can't tell you what was or wasn't. And then I said, because I had spent 2 hours with Iris and 2 minutes with a small bone shape I am still not sure I saw. They're together. I logged the weight discrepancy as machine variance. It happens. I logged the afterburner trips as sensor drift. That happens too. I wrote a note to myself that I did not put in any file. Check chamber tile by peephole. It had a hairline crack I'd swear wasn't there before. Here's what I can tell you. For 3 nights after that, when I closed up, the kiln room grates sang at a frequency like a lullaby. Not a song with words, but a tune you can know without hearing it before. I caught myself humming it and did not know when I started. I opened the small window, not enough to mess the negative pressure, just enough to let the air you could call night in, and the sound thinned and then was gone. I shut the window. It stayed gone. I haven't heard it since. Now, when a family asks me about jewelry, I say the policy like I'm supposed to. I also say, if there's anything you're putting in that you want to tell me about, tell me. They usually tell me everything from rosaries to letters. No one has told me about a locket with hair again. I hope they won't. And I can't walk into the kiln room without seeing a small curved thing reflected back at me out of heat, whether it's there or not. People ask if the job is rough. They mean heat and ash and grief. It is. It's also like tending a very old machine that understands promises. I can't say what happened in that cycle. I can say what I won't do. I won't separate what asks to stay together if it doesn't hurt the living, and I won't ignore it when the room hums like a mother. My job sounds straightforward. Inventory, stabilize, reseal, digitize, catalog. It's not. Every specimen is a story that began in a body and ended in a jar because someone, early in our institution's life, believed learning justified keeping. Some of those tales are proud, some are ugly. My favorite sound is a jar lid that gives when you coax it with warm water and careful hands. My least favorite is compactor shelving moving when no one told it to. We number everything. We have accession books in copperplate script from a century ago and a modern database that pretends it understands the handwriting of men who learned with quills. That's where 1901.47b lives, or doesn't. It depends on the day. 5 years ago, HVAC tore up our floor for an overhaul. That meant moving the wet collection out of the oldest room in the building and into a temporary space 2 corridors over. Jars don't like to be moved. Old shellac cracks. Ground glass stoppers fused by 100 years of dust and neglect object to new humidity, like elderly knees, object to stairs. We wrapped, we boxed, we labeled like we were packing always for our own funerals. On day 2 of the move, I noticed a gap in drawer 17C, 3rd aisle, 4th bay, middle height, where a jar should have been. The shelf paper had a ring of amber where its base had always shed a thin halo of evaporated formalin. The The drawer card said 1901.47B, mitral valve with exuberant vegetations, endocarditis, donor, RH, surgeon, D. Halverson. I knew the jar well. It was old. It had a shellacked string label with the surgeon's hand, and a lid that liked to seize if you didn't burp it gently. It shouldn't have been anywhere but 17C. I did a sweep. Nothing. I checked the quarantine shelf where we parked leakers. Nothing. I checked the digitization lab. No jar with that number. I chalked it up to the move and wrote on the card temp removed and D signed my initials. The next morning, 47B was back in drawer 17C grinning at me through amber glass like a tooth in a grin. The shelf paper under it was dry. The wet ring had shifted a quarter-inch to the left as if the jar had never been moved and the shelf had. You don't start with ghosts when you work in a basement. You start with staff error. I asked my tech if she'd pulled the jar and put it back. She swore no. I asked the surgical path resident if he'd shown it to a class. He said he'd never asked to remove a wet specimen. He had the reverence of a person who knows what formalin does to skin. The jar sat under its own tiny weather system, condensation that formed and ran like tears on the inside in the exact same pattern as always, so familiar I've seen it in my sleep. I pulled the accession ledger from 1901. The paper smelled like mice who'd made honorable lives and tidy deaths. 47B was there in a hand so neat it bordered on spite. RH, Ruth H., age 32, febrile, murmur. Surgery performed by Dr. Halverson. Valve excised and replaced. Specimen retained for teaching. A note in the margin, scrawled later in a different hand. Family requests return at time of death, to be destroyed after teaching use. We never do that now, return an organ decades later to go into the ground, but medicine was a different animal in 1901. There was a second note later still. Patient deceased 1947. Husband requests remittance. Surgeon declines. The word declines had been underlined twice. That changed things. Already 47B felt like a promise not kept. It felt like an argument a shelf had been having for a century. I moved the jar myself, belted it down on a cart like it was a cranky uncle, and carried it to our stabilization bench. I checked the seal. The glyptal resin had cracked in a star. I resealed with parafilm and new shellac. The modern and the old married ugly and effective. I put the jar on the quarantine shelf under a sign that read in 20-point font, "Do not move." The quarantine shelf is under a vent that breathes too cold in winter and too wet in summer. The air back there has a note to it like old pennies and something sweet, almost medicinal, like cherry cough syrup remembered by a grandmother. The compactor rails under the floor creak when the far aisle is moved, a sound like a groan heard through water. I locked the quarantine cabinet. The next morning, 47B was in drawer 17C. The quarantine cabinet was still locked. It gets your back up when objects move when they are not supposed to. I started hearing a sound at the edge of the jar's chorus. Not the glass tick of temperature adjusting and not the drip of a bad seal. A tap. One, then another, like someone inside a jar was trying very politely to get my attention without being rude about it. I set a small camera above 17C on a Friday. We don't have a budget for ghost hunting. I repurposed a digitization cam and set it to take a frame every 5 minutes. I reviewed it Monday with a coffee strong enough to argue. The frame showed a still life. Jars, dust motes, my tech's arm reaching in. At 2:10 a.m. on Saturday, the building empty, the lights on, sensors off, drawer 17C slid out 3 inches on its rails and then slid back. The jar didn't move, the drawer did. The entire shelving bank said with the little push that parted parafilm from air mine. I was in the back stacks one night, and later doing a thing I tell my boss I never do, staying late alone. The day had stacked on me, and the refrigeration unit for the gross room had blown a breaker upstairs, and a resident had spilled a small volume of preservative and tried to clean it with alcohol and created a smell we all had to sign a form for. I wanted quiet. I had 1901.47B on the stabilization bench and a light I save for careful work. A long-armed lamp with a circle of fluorescent light that makes jarred things look like they're floating in a soft eclipse. The compactor shelving moved with a twitch that grew into an intent. There's a crank wheel at the end of each bank now replaced by a push button that controls a motor and safety sensors. The safety caught. The aisle lights came up. For 3 seconds, the shelves pressed in, as if the room wanted me closer to something. I pressed the panic bar. The motion stopped, then started again. It's a feeling I don't care to repeat in this lifetime, being chosen by architecture for its embrace. Something sloshed. The stabilization bench shook like a person remembering a fall. The 47B jar slid an inch to the edge and paused as if deciding whether to complete a narrative. I reached out and steadied it. The glass was cold enough to bring tears to my eyes. Through the amber, the mitral valve floated. Its little cauliflower growths of bacteria turned artifact, ugly and beautiful, tied with a thread like a balloon that had forgotten to be joyful. There was a second shape in the jar, one I had never catalogued and would have never allowed if I'd seen it earlier. It was a ring, not gold. It looked like a thin band of simple metal, maybe brass, etched crudely with initials. It slid along the bottom as if curious, and then, impossibly, rose through the fluid and hovered against the glass where my thumb pressed. The initials read RH, reversed by the curve of the jar. I blinked. The ring fell as if remembering it was heavier than memory. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the far end of the aisle. A person, a reflection, a trick of the safety light catching a poster I'd hung on the freezer door. The compactor shelf ticked again, like a clock wagging its finger. The jar tapped the shelf with a sound that had no right to be as quiet as it was. "Still mine," a voice said in the exact inside of my ear. Not a whisper, not a full sentence. A thought that had found English by accident. People want a good ending to a story like this. They want a ghost or a picture with a face behind a jar. I have a video of a drawer deciding to make a point. I have a paper trail in a ledger that shows a promise written and then crossed by the will of a man with status. I have a smell in my hair I can't scrub out with anything but time. I did the thing the margin note asked for a century late. I took a day, and my boss's patience, and a sliver of budget nobody was using, and I found Ruth H. She died in 1947. Her husband died in 1963. They had one daughter who married and moved 2 towns over, and had a son who died in 2009, and left a granddaughter in a house with a sycamore tree that leans as if thinking. I called in every favor I have with medical records and with the hospital's long memory. I wrote a letter. I expected it to be returned. The granddaughter came in wearing a sweater with a snag and a face that said she could meet anything at a walk. I showed her the ledger. I told her what the note said. I asked her whether a ring meant anything. She took the jar in with the caution of someone looking at an old wound. They had rings made from a coin, she said. He did, after her surgery. He was a machinist. They couldn't afford gold. He made one from a silver coin so it wouldn't turn her finger green. My mother said Ruth never took it off until the hospital did. She hated that. She said it felt like they took her wall. We have a policy about deaccessioning specimens. It involves committees and statements and a chain of decisions that are mostly designed to keep impulse and precedent from courting. We made a case. We made another. The chair of pathology leaned me into his doorframe and said, "If anyone asks, I have no idea what you're talking about." He signed anyway. On a day gray enough to be kind, we put 1901.47B into a new jar with a seal that would hold 2 weeks, just enough, the ring inside with it, and we carried it like we were carrying something alive into the chapel no one uses anymore. We said something between an apology and a thank you. The granddaughter took the jar and let me follow her to a plot where the markers were flat and the names quiet. She lowered the jar into a hole her son had dug with more care than I deserved. She filled the space with dirt like handfuls of sentences. Back in the basement, drawer 17C felt like a room after a guest goes home with their coat this time. I slid the drawer in and out. It moved like a drawer. The camera caught nothing but dust having its day in a beam of light. The taps stopped. The mine left my ears. I printed the accession ledger page and made a copy of our deaccession paperwork and put both in a folder labeled Returned. The database entry for 1901.47B reads, Status, deaccessioned, disposition, repatriated, note, promise kept. I kept one thing, above board, the string label Halverson wrote in 1901. I pressed it under glass. It's pinned to the wall behind my desk where I can stare at it when a student with a wide view of the word collection says something clever about how the dead belong to science. I say gently, only if we keep our promises. I run my thumb along the photo of drawer 17C in my mind and feel the exact surety of a thing that had had enough of waiting. The basement is still a basement. The lights still hum. The parafilm sticks to everything I don't want it to and refuses the thing I do. The compactor shelving has behaved like furniture. Every so often when I'm alone, I hear a tap that might be air bubbles catching in an imperfect seal. I go check anyway. If I see initials through glass, I say them. If I see a ring, I do not touch it unless I have a plan. The vanishing drawer does not vanish anymore. It is empty, labeled vacant in all caps, a reminder that sometimes the space is the story. The world is gentle here mostly. Death is not a failure for us. It is a thing we do well. But room 6 has a way of making goodbyes feel like you just discovered a door in your house that opens onto the sea. We call it the last room. We do end of life the same way we do the first day of school. with murmurs and lists, and a feeling like the universe is paying attention. If you want a ghost story, you'll get one. If you want a testimony, this is that, too. We admitted Mr. C, Charles, on a Tuesday in October when the maples outside were loud about their leaving. He was 68, end-stage pancreatic cancer, pain-managed, mind clear in the way a lake goes glass when the wind keeps its hands to itself. He had one daughter, Marae, and a laugh like a cough that forgot to be upset. "Just not room 6, he said during intake, sweaty with morphine and fear. He grinned to take the edge off his own superstition. "My wife died there. Mimi says it's a room with a draft and a temper." We had 2 rooms clean, 4 and 6. 4's toilet was misbehaving, 6 was clean and ready, its window just cracked, as we do in this place when we can. The little linen door was sealed on our side, a habit we started after we found a candy wrapper in the wall from 1972 and no one could explain how it got there. I told him the truth. 6 is the last one. "It's quiet," I said. He nodded as if a thing had demonstrated its inevitability. "If that's the way," he said. "If you haven't sat an overnight with a dying person, I can give you the senses of it, and maybe you'll understand why the unusual registers differently at 3 a.m. than it does at 3 p.m. The air in room 6 has a particular feel to it at night, cool not from the vent, but from the old brick backed against the chapel, like a church that never stopped being a church even when nobody sits in its pews. The call light over the door glows less red, more ember. It buzzes if you put your finger on it, a mosquito of a sound. The striker bed's built-in scale chimes when you zero it, a tiny merry ding, absurd in its cheer and weirdly comforting. Charles's pain was managed with a morphine drip, GTTs, titrated to comfort. He had a scopolamine patch behind his ear, and we used atropine drops under his tongue when the secretions thickened and his breath thought about becoming a rattle. His daughter slept in the recliner. Bad neck angle, better love. The first night, the little door behind the headboard knocked. Once. Soft. I checked the hall to see if our new CNA was putting away linens aggressively. No one was there. I put my hand on the door. It was cold enough that a circle of chill bled into my palm and stayed. "Okay," I said aloud to an architectural feature. "Quiet time." Around 1, the call light flickered without ringing, the way a person clears their throat to let you know they're in the doorway. I stood in the hall, looked at the console. Room 6's light was the only one with a breath to it. I silenced a non-existent alarm because sometimes that makes the room feel like you're participating. At 2, Charles woke and looked past me at a place over my left shoulder. People do that at the end. They see someone. They see a place. They look convinced they're being recognized. He smiled a little. "Do you hear him?" he asked. "Hear who?" I asked. "The man who says hush," he said. His lips formed the shaich. He liked the sound. His eyes slid to the linen door. He put his finger to his mouth like he used to do at Mass when the twins were cutting up. He held his hand up, his index finger bent just so. He wants it quiet. I didn't see anyone. I don't expect to, but I've been doing this long enough to know that what a person sees at the edge of the door is not mine to argue with. "We'll keep it quiet," I said, and turned the frankly ridiculous chirp of the IV pump down and the brightness of the overbed light to its lowest. At 3, the striker bed beeped a weight change alert. We keep it on so we know when someone tries to get up. I was in the doorway. No one had sat. The printout on the console reported a plus 15.8 weight change for a single second, and then a return to baseline. A glitch. I've seen it register the IV pole as if it weighed more than it had any right to. I zeroed it. The moment I did, the oxygen saturation monitor, still on his finger out of habit more than utility, spiked in a way that made the waveform sing and then drift down like the end of a happy song. At 4, the building did the thing old buildings do, shift their attention. The vent sighed. The crucifix on the wall above the headboard, hung cockeyed by countless hand cleanings, straightened. The little door's old knob, a black iron thing that looks like a chess piece, turned a quarter inch like someone was seeing how it felt. Charles's daughter woke. The room had the gray of hour before dawn. She rubbed her eyes and said, "I heard singing." Her mother had been a choir director. "He's here," Charles said, quiet. "The shusher. He'll tell you to be good." I stood at the foot of the bed and watched the pulse ox waveform do something I've seen only a handful of times. A little dance, an arc up as if the body recognized something, and then a steady flattening as a breath went from work to function to habit to memory. The overbed light flickered 3 times and then steadied. The hallway call lights in rooms 1, 3, and 5 blinked, an impossible synchronized shrug. And then, in the reflection on the dark screen of the TV where the light from the hallway caught and turned, I saw him. A man not in the room and very much in it. Tall, a black suit that belonged to a year before this one, a face I could not bring into focus as if it had been erased politely, and a hand held up with one finger at his lips the way my grandfather would when we entered a sanctuary. It is a terrible thing to tell someone who trusts you that you saw a thing you cannot explain at their father's bed, so I did not say it, not then. Charles saw him. "Okay," he said, like a man who has been given instructions he understands. He breathed out. He did not breathe in. The striker scale dinged. 16.2 Solbuit. Then baseline. The bedside. The little door knocked again. And I swear to you, because there are better things to lie about if I were going to lie, that the knock on our side was answered by a knock on the other, as if a person in a dark hall said, "Come along now." There are things you do after a death that are all hands and no words. You turn off pumps, you pull the sheet up, you call the on-call to pronounce. You let the daughter put her head on her father's chest one last time and listen to a place that doesn't make sound. You crack the window, because our aides' grandmothers told them to, and you have learned to respect grandmothers above every policy manual. I walked down to maintenance after the paperwork and found Henri, who has been in this building longer than the chalk in its heart. He drinks coffee that would strip paint and knows which circuit to jiggle when the chapel lights pretend they are not lights. I told him the bed scale's numbers. Ours, because I needed to say the numbers out loud to make them smaller. He nodded like he'd been waiting. "You know what that little door was for?" he said. He didn't wait. The old hospital, before time, kept the fever patients on this side. There was a narrow corridor behind the headboards. Families could sit out there when they weren't allowed in. Priests, too, and volunteers. One was a man who had lost his wife in the influenza. Big hands, late of the docks. He would sit and shush when the room got too sad. Not mean, kind. He held up his own finger to his lips. Like this. When he died, the sisters said he stayed. I believe the sisters about everything and nothing. He squinted at me. "You been hearing the knock?" he asked, and laughed before I could lie. I printed the striker's log at the end of my shift because it makes my rational brain tidy to see numbers. The deltas were there. They'll show up in the morning report, and someone will write malfunction and move on, and it will be both true and not. We cleaned room 6 like it was both a hospital room and a chapel. We, meaning me and the CNA whose grandmother taught her about windows, straightened the crucifix ourselves and didn't mention it. I kinesiotaped the look on my face so the next family wouldn't see it and think I was bringing trouble with me. 2 weeks later, another patient asked not to be put in room 6. He got room 4. The toilet had been fixed. He died as gently as a candle. Room 6 sat empty, its bed made, its small door's knob shining with the oil of 100 hands that have never turned it. The night I walked past and heard the call light flicker its little throat sound without going off, I said, "Okay," into the dark. "We'll keep it quiet." The hall felt like someone had nodded. We are not in the business of fear. We are in the business of accompaniment. The macabre lives here, sure, in the way that the last breath is a macabre thing if you aren't used to it. But the horror, when it comes, is rarely as such. Cream. It's a steady finger at the mouth of the living, asking us to hush for a second while someone figures out how to fit themselves through a door. I put the scales printout in a folder I keep in my locker. I don't look at it often. When I do, the numbers look like the kind of score you can hum. My colleagues bring their beliefs with them to their shifts. Some of us wear saints under our scrubs. Some carry stones. Some carry nothing but hand sanitizer and habit. When room 6 is occupied, we crack the window a hair. We tape the little door shut even though it's already sealed. We speak soft. I have started telling families a story about a man who worked here once whose job was to make sad rooms less noisy. It gives people permission to let the world be quiet for a minute. Every goodbye is a last room. This one just taught me to listen for the knock on the other side. We accept donors who have given their bodies for forensic science. We place them, track them, and let weather and scavengers do what they do under controlled observation. Morning rounds are routine. Check cages, check tarps, note taphonomic stage, fresh, bloat, active decay, advanced decay, dry remains. Collect insect samples, download data from the loggers. I carry the field keys in a notebook that's part sketchbook, part calendar, part confessional. It's my job to make sure the numbers match the bodies and the bodies match the map. Before I tell you about the number we didn't have, I need you to believe that I live by numbers. We inventory by case ID. We mark plots with GPS. We pin discs to donors with aluminum wire stamped with the ID. You can't lose track of a person out there. You don't get to. Late summer storm, one of those electrical tantrums that makes the river a voice, blew through on a Sunday. Power at the lab blinked hard enough to reset the incubator clocks. The field's only electric is the trail cams and the small recorder by the east fence. Both run on batteries with solar trickle. Both hate storms. I came in early Monday because storm damage is its own species of paperwork. Fallen branches, rattled cages, a tarp peeled back by wind can mean vultures took a free lunch. I parked by the gate, clipped the keys onto my belt, and did a smell check. Storm air has a metallic rinse to it even when it's moving rot. It was quieter than it should have been for August. Fewer flies. We had 7 donors at placement. The whiteboard in the field shed read 7. My GPS map showed 7 pins. When I downloaded the data loggers for the western row, the software said 8 units. We used small cylinder loggers with thermistors and humidity sensors, 1 per subject. We strapped them to a T-post by each donor's cage so they read the microclimate above the body. The file named it C. Left because I hadn't renamed the last deployment, West Row 7. In the CSV, there was an 8th column of temperature readings. The timestamp was right, bracketed around 2 in the morning when the heaviest rain fell. The logger ID read 019. We don't have a 0 series. Our IDs start with the year, 23. For this year, the 19 should have put it before I started. Case 1909 is a man whom I could tell you a dozen things about I shouldn't, because donors are people, and they don't stop being people when they start being data. His logger reads 19019, not 019. 019 didn't exist in any file I own. If you've ever opened a door expecting to see your kitchen and found someone else's, you know the gut drop. My brain did math, then undid it. 8 columns, 7 donors. 0 to 19 logging 1 degree cooler than ambient and tracking a dew point that matched none of the other units. It read like a shadow of a weather pattern that shouldn't have been there. I chalked it up to a corrupt file and went to walk the row. The storm had dropped oak sticks like punctuation marks on the cages. One cage had shifted an inch where the soil gave. I reset it and made a note. The entomology bait cups had taken on rain. I tipped and refilled them. At plot E, a cup had eggs not on the bait but lined along the lip as if the flies had been laying for something over the cup and resigned themselves to the next best thing. There's a specific smell to active decay, sweet, thick, like turned melon. The western row should have been a whole fruit stand. At the far corner where the meadow meets the fence, the air went cool and clean, like aftershave someone wore in a memory. The empty patch at the end of West Row used to hold a donor who'd reached skeletal. We'd recovered those remains for the lab. It was until we placed a new donor, just a rectangle of scuffed earth and coastal panic grass. That's where my GPS overlay said 019 was logging. That's where the bait cup had eggs on the lip. That's where the air smelled like the opposite of what we keep behind a fence. I checked the post. No logger, no strap, no cable tie, nothing. The trail cam, set to catch raccoons thinking about trying the cages, had filled its memory with rain and the grainy green of IR-lit night. I scrubbed through. At 0203 there was a gap, 19 seconds of blank, as if something had leaned close and then moved off. At 0204 the tall grass lay down, then stood up. That could have been wind gusts. It was storm night. The rational catalog had items, and I tried every one on. Later that afternoon, when the air pressed against the field like a hot hand, I checked the aluminum tag box in the shed on principle. We stamped the case number into an aluminum disc and run the thin wire through the ankle discs or toe strap. The roll of stamp tags lay in their usual pile, 23-189, 23-192, on through the week's deployments. On the bench next to them, by the stapler no one returns to its hook, sat a disc stamped 019. The stamp pattern was an older style we don't use. The wire loop had been twisted and then untwisted, like someone thought better of finishing a fastener. I took it. I'm not proud of that decision. I should have logged it, photographed it, called the PI and said, "Something weird is happening." I put it in my pocket like a coin. The next day we found a cage door unlatched. Our cages are cattle panel with a rebar staked frame and a simple chain and carabiner latch. Birds can rattle them. Raccoons can make them sing. To unhook that latch, you need a thumb. I reset eyes. And made a note. Nothing looked disturbed. Scavengers are messy. This had a tidiness that made my back teeth press together. That night, the recorder picked up a sound at 0142, like someone stepping on wet leaves and scrubbing their shoe. Then humming. It wasn't a tune. It was the idea of one. The recorder sits 5 feet off the ground in a raw pine weather box. The mic is directional. The sound came from the west row. It came from the empty plot. 3 days in, pattern set. The 8th column kept logging. We changed out the data logger batteries at the real stations. I bought a fresh set for the west row out of pocket because the field budget has to stretch, and this didn't feel like a line item you want to argue in front of a committee. I strapped a brand new unit to the vacant post where the map said nothing was. I named it blank because humor is a tool when science is confused. I went back just before dusk because the air was cooler and because the field feels different when the sun drops. It feels bigger. Things creak. Owls call. You walk softer without meaning to. I wanted to make sure the new logger was talking. The gate squeaked. I didn't grease it because the birds like the sound, and the birds are my free security system. I crossed to the west row with my notebook open to the grid page where blank had a little blank square drawn on it. The storm had flattened the panic grass. It lay like parted hair. At the empty plot, the air stitched from warm to cool and back like I was passing through layers. I could hear hogs 2 farm fields away. I could smell the field, which is its own chorus, sweet, ammoniac, earthy, fungal. In the empty square, none of that. Instead, the cold clean of early spring, even though cicadas sawed away like summer knives. The logger's tiny LED ticked a regular blink. It was logging. I crouched and held my hand above the sensor. Warmth from my palm should have moved the line. It did. Then, without a breeze, without anything, the line dropped as if a cloud had stepped between me and a sun I couldn't see. My skin pebbled. The chain on the nearest cage clicked against its ring twice, like a person flicking a fingernail against steel. "Okay," I said to no one that ever answered. "Okay." I don't know why I did what I did next. I reached into my pocket and took out the Zoda 19 disc. I hung it on the T-post, the wire loop loose, the disc a silly ornament. It spun once, picked a position, and stopped. I wrote in my notebook, because the act of writing gives things edges. 019 disc hung at blank 1908 hours. See if missing by morning. On my way out, breeze or no breeze, every grass stem lifted like a question mark and lay back down flat. I slept badly. At 2:11, my phone pinged with the logger's remote alert. I'd told it to text me if blank dropped more than 10 degrees in a minute. It had dropped 16. I dressed without thinking. The field is 20 minutes from my apartment when every light is green. I hit red after red, and every time the light changed, I half expected to look in the rear view and see someone in a Tyvek suit in the back seat. Ridiculous, but there it is. The field at 2:40 is not the field at 1908. It's an idea of a place. My flashlight made a tunnel. Moths banged themselves against the beam. The fence breathed in night noises. I went to the west row stupid fast. The 019 disc hung where I'd left it. The wire was no longer looped. It circled the T-post twice like a child's attempt at a bow. The disc rested against the post at the exact height a tag would sit if it were around an ankle bone wired to a living person's idea of dignity. The air at the empty plot was as cold as the cooler we store donors in before placement, cold like light. Something scuffed behind me, and the chain sang. I turned that flashlight like a kung fu teacher and lit up a cage, a donor in bloat who looked like every human my job ever asked me to look at. Like a person and not a person. The fingers on that donor's left hand were splayed in a way they hadn't been earlier. The hand faced the empty plot. The recorder by the fence caught a voice then. I have it on a drive at the lab labeled Field Audio Annotated. It's a whisper only because the mic is bad at volume. It's a man's voice because the pitch is that, not because of words. It says 3 syllables in a row, and every time I listen I hear different ones. No more cold. Not the cold. No morgue. All true enough differences to make you want to never put someone back on ice again. I brought blank into the lab the next morning and printed the graph. It looked like a seismograph from a small earthquake that only the patch of dirt at the corner had felt. It was the coolest plot in the field from 0156 to 0219. Then it normalized like a person getting under a blanket. I told the PI because at a certain point having a secret in a place that keeps faith with the dead becomes a kind of disrespect. I did not expect the reaction I got. He didn't laugh. He didn't pat my hand. He said carefully, "Before your time in 97, we accepted a donor whose paperwork wasn't complete. We were new. The family thought donation meant he'd be in the field right away. There was a delay. He sat in the county cooler for 3 weeks while lawyers wrote memos. The family withdrew. He never came through our gate. We renumbered after that. We used to have single-digit zeros. I canceled them." 019, I asked.
He opened his file cabinet, the I remember things drawer, and pulled a folder with a number that made my stomach go small. 0 to 19. He flipped the report and there was a printout from a dot matrix printer for a logger we used for all of 2 years before the case budgets died and then revived. The graph in that file was a flat line. The page clipped to it read, "NO field placement." He said, "No one uses that number now. Did you put it somewhere?" I set the disk on his desk. He didn't touch it. We put a donor at blank a week later. Not because of ghosts. Because our calendar said it was time, and because my part of the ritual wanted that square to be doing what that square was for. The new donor's family wanted sky and seasons and bugs. The placement went like placements go, yellow jackets checked in, the sun hunched overhead, the smell came on like a promise being kept, the extra column in the loggers vanished. 0 to 19 stopped populating. The recorder recorded wind and owls and a raccoon cussing out a possum. The bait cups had eggs only on the bait that I asked for a new roll of discs stamped with the current year and alphabet. The shop that makes them slipped an extra into the bag by mistake or on purpose, a blank. No number. Just metal. I wired it to the T-post at blank and left it there like a truce flag. We still log 7 when there are 7 and 8 when there are 8. The whiteboard adds up. Every so often, in high summer, when the yard is its worst, I stop by that end of the row and put my hand out over the grass. The air there is a degree cooler. Or I imagine it is. Either way, I say to a patch of thin panic grass and a T-post with a nameless disc, you're not in the cold. Not here. One last thing, the trail cam that blanked for 19 seconds the first night. I moved it to the opposite fence post for a better angle. Twice, in broad daylight, it caught me crossing T. He feeled and froze a frame of me standing at blank with my hand out. In the reflection on the aluminum disc, there's a second person at my shoulder in a white suit. He's me. Or he's not. I didn't save those frames to the public archive. I have them anyway.
My studio is a room in the county crime lab's basement. The lights hum and the elevator dings like it's always getting ahead of itself. The cement is painted the kind of gray that makes newborns look like paperwork. I keep a ceramic mug with 3 brushes in it even though I don't paint at work. Habit. The walls hold smiling faces drawn from memory by people who needed me to turn an idea into a sketch. Those are my daily bread. The clay is something else. Clay is prayer. Jane Doe, 1406, came out of a culvert in late winter with a minimum number of bones for ID. The skull was intact, water-stained, with a cut along the parietal that told me a saw had said her name once. The jaw was present, maxilla intact, teeth so good a dentist could have dialed a number if we knew the name to give him. We didn't. We put her in a tray and brought her to me. We start with the science. We photograph the skull from every angle. We take cranial measurements. We estimate sex, ancestry, and age at death. We consult tissue depth charts, the ones from Rhine and from the more recent studies that added more data points across more populations. We mark depths at standard craniofacial sites, glabella, nasion, subnasale, malar points, gonion, pogonion. We set pegs into the bone at those depths, like a porcupine designed by engineers, so the clay knows how far to stand from the bone. I set Jane's skull on the stand, mounted to the cervical hook, balanced so the Frankfurt horizontal plane sat where it should. I applied a thin layer of oil to keep the clay from binding. I picked up my loop tool. The elevator dinged. It always dings. This time it dinged, and the doors opened with nobody inside. It happens. A key card catches a floor and then leaves. I set my phone to do not disturb and leaned into the work. Clay has a smell like clean earth in old basements. Additions happen in planes, not in blobs. You build the face as architecture. Nasal spine suggests nose projection. The anterior nasal spine and nasofrontal angle give clues about shape. The zygomatic arches say cheekbones or shy cheeks. The mandible sets the jawline. The teeth set the mouth. You give the face a skin. The fluorescent ring light over the stand makes the clay look like warm skin when it's at the right stage. When it's too cool, it looks like an unripe pear. The room's air is dry enough to make clay crack if you forget to cover at lunch. I keep Mr. Bottles and damp cloths. My radio, set low to stave off the hum, is always 2 songs behind the present. As I brought the mouth together around the dental arcade, a beautiful set of teeth with a tiny chip on the left central incisor, likely antemortem, I noticed something I don't usually see. A persistent crack kept opening along the lower lip. Not a drying crack, not a structural failure, a fissure that refused the smoothing my thumbs did. I warmed the clay. I added softening wax to the corner to keep the commissure from fighting me. It separated again. I checked the occlusion. The jaw set correctly, the teeth met where they should. I added the philtrum. The crack appeared under it like a frown line that claimed the territory. Fine. Expression issues happen. Some mouths need coaxing. I built up the cheeks and placed the eyes, my stock set of acrylic spheres with painted irises centered under the supraorbital ridges, parking the lids at a neutral position. As soon as I stepped back, the left eyelid drooped. I lifted it. It drooped again when I turned. There are drafts in that room. Putty fixes a multitude of sins. I puttied. It drooped. Around midnight the first day, the elevator dinged again. Security had gone home. The lab techs above me were long done. I felt the air change, the way it does when someone taller than you stands behind you. I turned to, fast, knocked my stool, and watched it slide toward the drain in the floor as if it wanted to catalog itself as evidence. There was nobody, but the face on the stand looked wrong. My brain had been moving toward a mouth shape that would read as soft. The left side of the mouth had pulled tight as if she were biting the inside of her cheek. I have made that adjustment on living faces. People nervous in a chair, people concentrating. It's a small muscle habit that leaves a tell in the line. I put my thumb at the mucocutaneous border and pressed it out. It went in like a memory reluctantly given up. The next morning, my supervisor walked me through the checklist. Tissue markers verified, nose placed from bony anatomy, ears aligned with the nose and mandible angles. Ears are always a guess. People think they know, but ears are chaos. He asked about hairstyle. That's theatrical. I set hair to a nondescript bob so the public can project. He asked if I wanted to do a bust for media or 3D photogrammetry. We chose both. He left me to it. I covered the bust with a damp muslin to slow the drying and took a break. In the hall, the soda machine flickered through $1.25 buys and help because someone thought that was fun when they programmed it. When I came back, the lower lip had split again, and the clay at the corners of the mouth had ridged itself into a tiny sneer. Okay, I said, and looked up without meaning to the camera in the corner that we keep facing the evidence safe. The little red LED blinked like a heartbeat. By the end of day 2, the bust had a face that felt like a person. Being in a room alone with a face you made on top of a skull is a specific intimacy. You feel stupid for talking to her. You do it anyway. Eyebrows here? You ask. You lift the clay and lay it down again. Would you have smiled in pictures? You ask, and flick the mouth into a softer line. The bust answers only in your own head most of the time. This one answered otherwise. The elevator dinged and held. The doors didn't close. The hallway beyond the lab smelled like wet leaves. It hadn't rained. My sink faucet chimed, the tiniest ring you get when hot pipe expands. The studio lights wavered and then steadied. I put my finger on the clay at the left cheek, thinking I could warm out the bite line. The clay depressed not under my thumb, but under something like a breath. I felt breath. My own chest wasn't moving. I froze with my thumb at the corner of a dead woman's mouth. On the stand, the skull beneath clay turned a thought inside out. I don't have language for it. The face wanted to be closer to something I hadn't given it yet. I turned to my reference wall. We'd pulled missing person flyers from a 3-state radius for women between 20 and 35 with dental charts that matched. The stack was heavy. On top sat an image we'd flagged as low probability because the ancestry estimate was off, but I'd left it up because sometimes the end is more patient than the beginning. She had a dog bite scar through the left eyebrow from age 13, stated in the narrative. Our skull had a faint healed nick in the frontal bone above the supraorbital margin. If you didn't look for it, you'd miss it. If you were building, your thumb would find it. I'd smoothed it away without meaning to. I took the loop tool and cut the clay back along the eyebrow. It felt like blasphemy, unmaking a face you've made. I carved a thin, crooked line over the left supraorbital ridge. I stepped back, then forward again, close enough to smell the clay as a living thing. I let the lower lip pull the way it wanted, into that slight bite. The room dropped 2 degrees. My phone logged it because I keep a little thermometer for the sake of casts that hate humidity. The elevator doors slid closed, then opened, then closed again, without the ding. In the hall, slaps of wet footprints appeared like someone had walked in invisible shoes from the janitor closet toward my door and then evaporated. The camera in the corner recorded me stepping back and sitting hard on my stool like my knees went. It also recorded, later, when security reviewed it because I asked them to, the bust's head turning 2 degrees. Cameras catch movement between frames. 2 frames showed the nose angled not where I'd left it. I added one more thing, a slight left tilt to the mouth, the kind of asymmetry you only get if you've spent a life of small smiles. It's the kind people who hate their teeth make when they laugh. It's a private joke between a mouth and its mirror. We photographed the bust. We did photogrammetry for media, spun it into a rotating 3D model, avoided naming details that would bias a family's hope. The evening newscast ran it in that delicate tone producers adopt when they want to sound compassionate and command your sadness at once. The station posted it to their social feeds and asked for tips. The first call came at 9:17 p.m. A woman, Midwestern vowels, a tiredness that comes from long years of long memories, said she was always biting her cheek. You've got that wrong. She'd do it on the right when she was lying, left when she was mad. This looks like left. The missing person officer on the line asked for a name. The caller gave one that was in our stack with a red line through it because dental had eliminated her 3 years earlier. The dentist was wrong, she said, like a prayer and a fight in one breath. The officer took her information, asked her to come in, and hung up. And then I sat at my desk with my hands flat on the blotter and felt the building make room for a new idea. It took a week. DNA isn't TV. The mother brought photographs, childhood, a high school graduation, a shy profile turned toward a dog with a grinning mouth. The scar through the brow was there, whiter in some lights, pink in others. Her bite was irregular. The dentist had charted it wrong. Or we had the wrong chart then. We had her now. I stayed away from the lab the afternoon the family met the detective because there's a boundary you keep. I went back after midnight to cover the bust. We don't put a bag over a face like a party trick. We wrap it like a thing we're keeping for a later day. I put the muslin over Jane Doe, 14 at 06, who wasn't Jane anymore, and the muslin lay as if it meant to keep the clay warm. The elevator doesn't ding for me at odd hours anymore. It does sometimes when the bust room door is closed and the light is on without me, except I don't leave it on anymore. The janitor says he hears someone humming near my door. He says it's my radio left low on a station that plays songs no one admits listening to. I know it isn't. I still keep the clay softener by my elbow. I set tissue depth markers like rosaries. Every face since, I look for the hidden tell, a scar, an asymmetry, a bad habit of muscle. I put it in, even if it's a guess. The mouth will fight you if you lie. If you get it wrong, the crack comes back. If you get it right, sometimes the room answers by being less empty. The bust of 1406 sits on a shelf now, covered, catalogued, case closed. The skull went to the evidence room to wait for the rest of her. The mother sent me a postcard from a city I hope I never have to pronounce into a dictaphone. It says, "You got her mouth." That's the kind of sentence you can live inside for a long time. I don't tell people about the wet footprints or the camera frames that moved when I didn't. I tell them the clay worked. I tell them the numbers matched the person. If the elevator dings when I take the muslin off, I say hello under my breath. I don't mind company. I mind the faces that haven't found their names yet. When the clay fights, I listen. If you've ever heard a grave bell ring, you'll want to argue with me. You'll say drafts and wind and a kid with fishing line. You'll say safety coffins were a Victorian fad. You'll be right. And then I'll tell you about a night in late April, thunder still pinning the clouds to the horizon, when the bell at Mary Ellen Voss's grave rang twice. We keep good records. The sexton before me kept better, if you like stories with ink in the margins. In the ledger for 1881, a notation, M.E. Voss, interred with safety alarm at family's insistence. Tubing vent to watch house, cord to bell, as purchased from J. Hargreaves, New York. It was cholera season. Mary Ellen was 24. She had a son the age of my grandson. People drank fear with their tea. The alarm system was simple. A half-inch pipe from coffin to surface, a bell on a yoke, a cord through the pipe tied to the lady's wrist. The watch house sat at the foot of Starling Row. Back then, men took turns at night to listen for bells because grave robbers liked fresh burials and the wealthy had doctors in their pockets. We don't ring anymore except when kids sneak to make each other brave and run away giggling. We had an exhumation scheduled for a lot 2 down from Mary Ellen, family moving an ancestor to a new crypt, all legal and signed. The day before, I walked the row to mark the corners with flags so the backhoe operator would know where not to dig. As I set the last flag, wind moved my hair like fingers. It wasn't windy. The bell at Voss's plot made the smallest sound a bell can make, a mouth of brass thinking about voice. Then it rang, clear, twice, paused like it knew it had an audience. It's amazing how much you can rationalize in a cemetery if you give yourself 5 minutes. Chained bells catch on their own weight. Birds sit. Kids tie things. The bell is old. The rope had long ago rotted. The pipe had been piaped in 1903 by order of the board because of complaints about smell. The cap sat under a zinc finial that unscrewed with the stubbornness of a thing that remembers hands. I put my fingers to the finial. It was warm, though the air was cool. I told myself all the practical words I own and then went to the watch house to sit with my thermos and pretend the coffee there had the power of consecration. The watch house these days is where I keep the riding mower and extra 2x6s for shoring. It still has a little window the watchmen use to hold the tube to their ear. It smells like gasoline and hay and wet stone. There are sounds at night that don't sound like anything by day. The highway a mile away becomes a river. The owl that sleeps in the cedar by the Voss plot becomes a judge passing sentence. When it rains far off, the cemetery hums with a kind of held breath. I told myself I'd heard the bell because bells want to ring in your head when your head is alone. I folded the ledger open to the page where 1881 lay like a photograph. In the margin next to Mary Ellen's name was a note in the old sexton's hand. Alarm sounded thrice on 29th April. Dug to coffin. Deceased still at peace. Cord discovered wrapped around right wrist bone. Children present during excavation. Prayers said. Bell returned to rest. The word rest had been underlined twice. At 2 in the morning, with the watch house door cracked and moths practicing religion against the single bulb, the bell rang again. Not polite. 2 rings, pause, then 3. I stood too fast and hit my hip on the mower. I crossed the grass careful, flashlight low out of respect and because the dead don't like beams in their faces. The bell yoke stood out of the soft ground like a question. The chain looked newer than it should have, perhaps because it was the only thing that ever got polished by weather and hands. The finial on the zinc pipe had unscrewed half a turn. I didn't touch it that night. I went back to the watch house and read more notes than I should have because stories make better company than fear. The sexton of 1903 wrote in tight script, Fam Voss petitions to remove warning device. Sisters claim undue distress. Device capped. Watch house duty ended for Starling Row. We came in at 6:45 with the backhoe and the vault team and the county rep who hates mud. The exhumation was 2 graves down, but I swung by Mary Ellen's plot first with my spade because I don't ignore bells, even when I don't believe in what they say. I unscrewed the finial, greased by rain, made gentle by time, and found the pipe clean, the interior rifled with age. Stupid to put my ear to it. I put my ear to it. I expected a nest smell or nothing. I heard something like wind moving through a flute. The backhoe operator called for me. We set boards, pulled sod, dug clean. Old graves are delicate. You want the walls to hold, you don't want the vault to cave. At 30 inches, the soil changed from the sandy loam the landscapers mix in to the clay that holds everything in its old position. The vault showed its arched back like a turtle. We cleared, lifted the lid with straps, and there it was. A coffin long collapsed. The bones of the occupants settled toward the middle, the shroud mostly gone unless you count that particular thread cling that keeps secrets. We did what exhumations ask. We collected with gentle hands, we documented, we treated old bones like they were a person, because they are. The county rep signed forms without looking anyone in the eye. We set the lid back and refilled. The crew broke for lunch. I went back to Starling Row. At the Voss plot, the bell chain hung slack. The finial lay in the grass. I should have been angry then. Kids, vandals, Instagram ghouls. The pipe had a blot on its lip like someone had touched it with a muddy finger. The bell rang once, quiet. The headstone, a white bronze marker that had weathered to a dignified dullness, read simply, Mary Ellen, beloved wife and mother, 1857 to 1881. No lambs, no angels. People died here like they had jobs, and Mary Ellen's job had been to die in a year when the water turned on you. I fed a line down the pipe, just florist wire on a spool, because I wanted to know how far before it caught. It hit with a soft, resonant sound at about 5 feet, the level of the coffin. Basic math, basic horror. It's easy to say you would never, under any circumstances, open an old coffin you aren't required to. If you've ever stood over one with a bell ringing independent of weather, you will learn something about your conviction. I traced the rectangle edge of Mary Ellen's plot with the spade, nodding to a history I was cutting, and then stopped. My job is earth and duty. My job is not exhuming the dead for feelings. I screwed the finial back on and patted the soil like you do when you fuss over a bedspread after someone made it perfectly well without you. When the crew left for the day, Starling Row held on to the heat and the hum. The bell rang at dusk. 3 rings, a pause, 1. My radio on my belt clicked with static like someone trying to talk and remembering there wasn't a channel. I stood there with my hands in dirt and an ache in my neck that comes from old lifting, and I said out loud because this place hears you, I can't open you unless I have a reason that isn't mine. The reason came a week later in the form of a letter stuck under my office door like a child's idea of covert. No return address. Inside, a folded photocopy of a page from the 1881 ledger, the same page I'd read, with a new line written in a fine, old woman's hand. My grandmother told me her mother rang the bell 3 times and once. She said that was a code for a promise not kept. I went back to the ledger room and did what the job calls second only to holes, research. In 1881, the Voss family purchased a second lot across town in the new cemetery with room for a proper family plot. They only moved one person then, an infant who died the winter after Mary Ellen. They left her. The committee minutes recorded in harsh male words. Petition to remove and re-enter Mrs. Voss denied until fees cleared. The fees never cleared. The husband left town, an entry in 1883, remarried. I asked the board for permission to inspect the integrity of the Voss grave. They said fine, as long as I didn't disturb. We dug around the pipe, careful as surgeons. At the coffin lid line we stopped, and I did a thing you do when you've learned how to do it by standing next to men who knew more. I slid a borescope down the pipe. Don't picture a YouTube trending. Picture a pencil-thin camera with a light, a feed to a tablet balanced on your knee, and the dumb courage it takes to put a lens where it doesn't belong. The screen filled with dirt motes that looked like stars, then wood grain, close and dark, then unmistakably the interior of a coffin lid, with the imprint of cloth and the ghost of a pattern pressed into it like a map of a hand. The cord tied to the wrist had long since slackened. It lay coiled like a snake near what had been bones and were now powdered suggestion. In the corner of the frame, something square, paper, caught the light. We widened the trench by an inch where the pipe met the lid, loosened the wood just enough to slide not paper but tin free. It was a funeral card, sealed in wax around its edges, saying in perfect black letters under glass, "I will come again." A Victorian mourning card, common as breath then. The wax had failed in one corner. Moisture had seeped. Bits of the card stuck to my glove. The words didn't. The board would have called it a curiosity. For me it was a sentence the dead had been trying to finish. I told the board, as a man tired of bells and reports, the truth in a shape they could okay. Family had petitioned for reinterment. Fees unpaid then, fees paid now by a descendant. I paid them myself. We scheduled the disinterment for a Tuesday with no forecasted rain. We lifted Mary Ellen Voss into the light 142 years after she went under it. We did it with respect that would have made the old sexton nod. We set her into a modern vault with her old tin card and the bell finial laid by the foot because I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. We took her across town to the Voss plot where grass had never greened right because the ground knew itself missing something. We put the bell yoke in my truck and drove it too. At the new grave I set the bell. It rang once when the vault lid kissed the vault wall like a promise kept. Starling Row is quieter. The watch house went back to smelling like gasoline and hay and not like someone's question. Sometimes starlings lift from the sweet gums in a black flock that moves like thought, and sometimes, under that, I hear a bell that isn't there. I don't mind. I think places have long memories. I think the dead are patient until they aren't. There's a little girl who rides her bike through the cemetery every Saturday morning while her father runs the perimeter. She asked me once about the bells on the old graves. I told her the truth in a size that fits a child. They were in case somebody needed help finding their way out. She nodded like someone who understands maps. She asked me if anyone ever rang. I said yes, and we listened. She looked at Starling Row, where the grass lies clean, and said, "Good." Every so often, the Voss bell catches light at noon and throws it like water onto the grass. I set my hand on the yoke, and it vibrates through my palm like a purr. When it rings now, it rings for wind and weather and my small routines, not because someone is under the ground with a cord at their wrist. If it ever rang wrong again, I would hear it. I keep my tools sharp. I keep my ledger open. I keep my office door unlatched. Welcome back to Sleep Ma. Tonight we walk the edge of the macabre, embalmers and ossuaries, the field where science meets decay, the last rooms where goodbyes are whispered, and the graves that remember more than we do. If these true testimonies moved you or kept you looking over your shoulder, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop your thoughts or your own encounters in the comments. It helps the channel, and it helps us find the next story that shouldn't be forgotten. Like the dead we tend, these stories ask for light. Sleep with one eye open. The dark is patient,